In a city ruled by powerful alphas, everyone feared one name, Darius Alexis. He controlled the money, the contracts, and the fear. No one challenged him. No one looked him in the eye, until one Omega lawyer walked into his boardroom, wearing a suit jacket, steel-toed boots, and absolutely no fear. Darius was supposed to control the room, but the moment he caught Butch's scent, the most feared alpha in the city almost lost control. And for the first time in his life, Darius Alexis met someone he could not own, could not command, and could not forget. Before we continue, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who enjoys intense romance stories. Now, let's begin. Everyone in the city knew the name Darius Alexis. You didn't speak it too loudly, you didn't invoke it carelessly. It was the kind of name that sat heavy in a room long after the man himself had left. A name that made grown alphas straighten their spines and lower their eyes. Darius had built his empire from nothing and sharpened it into something that gleamed like a blade. He controlled the city's arteries, the money, the contracts, the fear. He was S tier, the rarest classification of alpha, and every living soul with any sense understood what that meant. Cross him, and you didn't get a second chance to regret it. Butch had heard the name. He simply didn't care. He had grown up in St. Augustine's orphanage on the east side of the city, where caring about powerful men was a luxury nobody could afford. What mattered there was survival, learning to read a room before the door opened, learning to take a hit and give 3 back. The world had decided early on what Butch was, an Omega. It had handed him the script, soft, submissive, yielding, and waited for him to perform it. Butch had taken that script, folded it neatly, and shoved it somewhere the sun didn't shine. He wore his suppressants the way other people wore armor. He had put himself through school on sheer stubbornness, graduated in the top 3% of his law class, and taken a position at Mercer & Cole, one of the city's sharpest firms, on merit alone. Nobody had given him anything. Nobody ever would. The only person who came close to knowing the real Butch was Stefan. They had found each other at St. Augustine's when they were 9 years old. Stefan, a lanky beta boy with a gap in his front teeth and a habit of stealing bread rolls for Butch when the bigger kids got greedy. 20 years later, they still shared an apartment, different reasons now. Same loyalty. The Alexis file landed on Butch's desk on a Tuesday. His senior partner, Hargrove, had slid it across the mahogany with the kind of expression reserved for jury summons and root canals. Alexis versus Mercer. A commercial dispute. Darius Alexis was suing his former business partner, Quentin Mercer, for corporate espionage and breach of fiduciary duty. Quentin, it turned out, had spent 18 months feeding proprietary intelligence to a rival firm while still drawing a salary and a title from Darius's empire. The betrayal had cost Darius north of $40 million and a government contract that had taken 3 years to secure. It was the kind of case that made careers. It was also the kind of case that made enemies. "You'll take the meeting," Hargrove had said. Not a question. Butch had looked at the name on the file, felt absolutely nothing of note, and said, "Fine." The Alexis building was the kind of architecture designed to make you feel small before you even stepped inside. Black glass and steel, 42 floors. The name carved in letters above the entrance that caught the afternoon light like a brand. Butch walked in with his suit on despite the summer heat, his long legs eating up the marble lobby floor, his black leather combat boots announcing each step with quiet authority. His black wraparound sunglasses stayed on until he reached the elevator. The lawyer moved like a predator. That was the first thing. Not the aggressive, chest-forward swagger of an alpha performing dominance. This was something quieter and far more dangerous. Controlled. Every movement was precisely what it needed to be, and nothing more. He was tall. Darius had to angle his gaze upward slightly, which was not something that happened often. And his face. God, his face. The jaw was a straight, clean line of bone. His lips were full, almost severe in their perfection, and the hollows beneath his cheekbones cast deep shadows that made him look carved rather than born. His black hair was pulled back into a ponytail. A dark shadow traced his jaw. Darius had spent 34 years being utterly, completely composed. He had sat across from heads of state, crime lords, and men who wanted him dead, and not one of them had cracked his surface. He was ice. He was iron. The scent hit him somewhere behind his sternum, and he felt, with dawning and absolute horror, his own pheromones begin to stir. No, he excused himself. He did it smoothly, a quiet word to Kelvin, a hand gesture that communicated continue without me, and walked to the private bathroom adjoining the conference suite with the measured pace of a man who had somewhere important to be. The moment the door clicked shut behind him, he gripped the edge of the sink and stared at his own reflection. His pupils were blown wide. He hadn't lost control of his biology since he was 16 years old. Turned on the cold tap and pressed both wrists under the water and breathed. Slow in, slow out. He rebuilt himself piece by piece the way he always did, methodical, ruthless, refusing to negotiate with weakness. By the time he straightened his tie, there was nothing on his face that hadn't been there before. He walked back into the room. Butch had watched him leave. He'd clocked the discomfort immediately, the slight tension in the set of the man's shoulders, the way those dark eyes had gone somewhere unreadable before he excused himself. Butch had seen that look before on alphas, that particular cocktail of want and wounded pride. Oh, what an alpha, he thought, keeping his face smooth. Probably thinks I'm too worthless to breathe his air. He set that feeling down before it could take root. He was here for the case, nothing else. When Darius returned, he was composed, immaculately so. He took his seat at the head of the table and turned the full weight of his attention on Butch. Dark eyes, steady and unblinking, the kind of gaze that most people found unbearable after 4 seconds. Butch held it without blinking. Something shifted almost imperceptibly in Darius's expression. So fast, Butch nearly missed it. The meeting lasted 90 minutes. Butch asked precise questions, took clean notes, and left without small talk. The moment the elevator doors closed behind him, Darius turned to Kelvin. "I need everything on that lawyer." His voice was entirely level. What he eats, where he drinks his coffee, his case history, his address. A pause. His favorite pajamas if you can manage it. Kelvin, who had worked for Darius for 6 years and considered himself unshockable, blinked. "Can you imagine?" Butch said, dropping onto the kitchen counter and watching Stefan move around the stove. "The audacity?" "Tell me," Stefan said, not looking up from the pot. This S-tier alpha, he looked at me like I'd tracked something in on my boots. Butch peeled off his jacket and dropped it over a stool. "I only took that case because Hargrove ordered it. Left to me, the moment he turned his nose up, I'd have been out of that building so fast." "Who was it?" "Darius Alexis." Stefan's spoon stopped moving. He turned around slowly. "I'm sorry. Who?" "You heard me." "Butch." Stefan set the spoon down with the careful deliberateness of a man choosing. His next words like a surgeon choosing instruments. "Do you know who Darius Alexis is? A man with a legal problem and a superiority complex. He controls half the cities." Butch raised an eyebrow. "I'm not especially impressed so far." Stefan looked at him for a long moment. Then he laughed, the real laugh, the helpless one that bent him at the waist. "Go shower," he managed. "Dinner's ready. You are going to get me killed one day, and I need to be fed first." Butch almost smiled. He pushed off the counter and headed down the hall. Darius didn't sleep. He sat in his room long after the close of work. He had work in front of him. He always had work in front of him. The contracts, the reports, the projections, the machinery of an empire that required constant attention. He closed his eyes. He saw the doorway. Suit jacket. Long legs. That jaw. He opened his eyes and called Kelvin. "Get me Elio," he said. Elio was his most frequent companion, an Omega he had known for 3 years, easy and uncomplicated and discreet. The kind of uncomplicated connection Darius had always chosen. An hour later, Eli arrived at the penthouse. Dark eyes, a slow smile, smelling of something warm and expensive. Darius. Darius looked up. For a moment, he felt nothing at all. Eli's pheromones drifted through the room, soft and inviting, and Darius's biology remained completely, totally indifferent. He released a controlled thread of his own scent, the kind of signal that would normally shift the temperature of a room in seconds. Nothing rose in him to follow it. He apologized to Eli quietly, pressed a card into his hand, and sent him home. Then he stood at the window for a long time with the uncomfortable awareness that the face he wanted to see belonged to a lawyer with a dangerous mouth, a cute ponytail, and a suit. The thing he had feared most, the thing every dominant alpha feared, the thing that stripped strategy and composure and control down to the bone, had apparently decided that now was its moment. He had found his mate. A lawyer who had looked him directly in the eye and not cared who he was. That, more than anything, was the problem. Darius Alexis, who could negotiate billion-dollar deals before breakfast, had no idea what to do with a man who found him mildly inconvenient. It was a hot night and Butch needed beer. Stefan was already asleep, a true feat considering the heat, and the fridge held nothing worth drinking. Butch pulled on his jacket, grabbed his wallet, and walked the 4 blocks to the corner store. She bought a 6-pack, tucked it under his arm, and was halfway back when they found him. 5 of them, young, drunk, and stupid, the most dangerous combination the city produced. They spread across the sidewalk in a particular formation that announced intention before a word was spoken. The big one in front had the kind of face that had been told it was handsome too many times. Polo shirt, khaki shorts, a grin like he'd just been handed a hunting license. "You need a ride somewhere?" he said. Butch kept walking. "Hey," the big one stepped sideways, cutting his path. "My car's not far. Come on, how about it?" The blonde one behind him giggled and skipped, actually skipped, to flank Butch's left. "Let's ride him." Butch measured the distance between them without turning his head. 5 bodies, various levels of fitness. The big one was the anchor, the blonde, the noise. 2 more hanging back, uncertain, following the lead. One on the right, who hadn't said anything yet, was watching with flat eyes. That one was the real problem. Where was the pepper spray? The other bag, the one he'd left at home. Because apparently today wasn't difficult enough. The big one reached out and touched Butch's hair. Butch stopped walking. He set the 6-pack down on the sidewalk, carefully, with the gentleness of a man who did not want his beer shaken. Then he straightened and looked at the big one with an expression several people, over the years, had later described as a warning they should have taken. "Last chance," Butch said quietly. "Walk away." The big one laughed. His friends laughed. Butch moved. He was fast. Faster than they expected. Faster than anything that big had a right to be. And the first blow dropped the big one before the laugh had fully left his face. The blonde came in swinging and caught an elbow across the jaw that sent him into the wall. Butch rolled under the third one's grab, used his own momentum against him, and put him face first into the pavement. The fourth got 3 steps of running start before Butch caught his wrist, twisted, and the crack of the joint was the loudest sound on the block. The flat-eyed one pulled a knife. He swung. The blade caught Butch's wrist. Butch looked at it, took it from him, put him on the ground. Silence settled over the sidewalk. 5 alphas in various states of damage. None of them standing. Butch rolled his shoulder, noted the warm sting where the knife had caught his wrist, shallow, nothing serious, and bent to pick up his 6-pack. Then he walked home. Kelvin called Darius that night with a report. 5 alphas. Corner of Drexel and Ninth, hospitalized. Cracked ribs, 1 broken jaw, 2 broken wrists, 1 dislocated shoulder. Something detonated quietly behind his ribs. He stood up from his desk, sat down again. The wrath that moved through him was not a clean, directed anger. It was something older and more animal than that. Something that made the room feel too small and his skin feel too tight. Possessiveness, raw, irrational, consuming possessiveness, for a man he had met once, for a man who didn't belong to him, for a man who would presumably take significant issue with the concept. He was furious. He didn't fully understand at whom. The responding officer's notes described the scene as inconsistent with a single assailant. "Kelvin," he said quietly, "I want the file. Names, addresses, photographs, everything." Kelvin arrived at the office 20 minutes later and handed it over. Darius read the report once, then again. Then he found the name of the victim-turned-perpetrator, Butch. The lawyer. Silence. He looked at the photographs. Broken noses, bruised faces, splinted wrists, 5 alphas. Then he looked at the list of injuries again. A sound escaped him, another followed. And suddenly, Darius was laughing. Not the polite, controlled sound he used in meetings. The real thing. It rose from somewhere deeper, unfiltered, and broke out of him before he could catch it. He was fully human. Whatever anger had been there dissolved so completely it almost felt absurd in hindsight. "What a man," he murmured. The smile came uninvited, warm, disarming. Something eased in his chest, like a door he hadn't realized was shut, quietly swinging open. He shook his head, still smiling, that unfamiliar certainty settling into him like an answer arriving long after the question had been asked. This man, this Omega, 5 alphas, and Butch had sent every one of them to the hospital. Kelvin watched his employer with carefully concealed alarm. In 6 years, he had never seen Darius Alexis look like that. "I think," Darius said, almost to himself, setting the file down and straightening his cuffs, "that I have hit the jackpot." The next day, he channeled his focus into his afternoon meeting at Mercer and Cole with the precision of a man determined not to think about a particular lawyer. He was professional. He was calm. He sat at the long table and reviewed the preliminary case documents and asked sharp, intelligent questions. And then Butch walked into the room. Fresh awareness hit him with humiliating force. The suit, the long legs, the ponytail, the severe line of his jaw. The same man who had occupied entirely too much of his thoughts for the last 24 hours took a seat across the table and opened a file as though Darius Alexis was not currently reconsidering several life choices. Then he saw the bandage. White gauze wrapped around Butch's left wrist, partially hidden by his jacket sleeve. Fresh, the edges still clean, changed recently. A small thing, entirely unremarkable. Fresh anger moved through Darius like a tide. He kept his face still. He kept his voice level. He maintained eye contact with the right people at the right moments and gave nothing away. Internally, his heartbeat had taken on a quality he was not accustomed to. Loud, insistent, pressing against his ribs with each pulse like something trying to get out. The bandage remained in the corner of his vision for the rest of the meeting. By the time the meeting ended, Darius could not have accurately summarized half of what had been discussed. He kept his face still. He kept his voice level. He maintained eye contact with the right people at the right moments and gave nothing away. Internally, his heartbeat had taken on a quality he was not accustomed to. Loud, insistent, pressing against his ribs with each pulse like something trying to get out. The bandage remained in the corner of his vision for the rest of the meeting. By the time the meeting ended, Darius could not have accurately summarized half of what had been discussed. He remembered the bandage, He remembered Butch, and he remembered, with growing irritation, that neither of those things should matter to him at all. When the meeting ended, he waited for the room to clear. Only then did he stand. He crossed the room with measured steps, gathered his files, exchanged the appropriate courtesies, and left. Anyone watching would have seen a calm, unhurried businessman. Kelvin, who knew him better, noticed the set of Darius's features still, but tightly held, like something contained just beneath the surface. 2 weeks later, Kelvin assembled everything there was to know about Butch and placed it on Darius's desk. The file was thin. Darius found that deeply unsettling. Born in the city, mother, 1 Sierra, an Omega, no surname on record, admitted to St. Augustine's orphanage on a Tuesday in March, infant in arms, and never came back. No father listed. The space on the form where a reason might have been given was blank, as if whoever filled it out had decided that some things didn't need documenting. Butch had grown up inside those walls. School records showed a boy who was quiet, then suddenly wasn't. A disciplinary note at 11 for breaking another child's finger, the margin annotation reading unprovoked. Darius doubted it was unprovoked. He had seen enough of the world to know what happened in places like St. Augustine's to children who smelled like Omega, and had nobody coming to collect them. The boy had taught himself to fight, taught himself to study, graduated secondary school in the top percentile, sat the law entrance examination twice. The first time he hadn't had the fees. The second time he had saved them himself, working night shifts at a logistics warehouse while attending classes during the day, graduated law school, passed the bar on his first attempt, joined Mercer and Cole 18 months ago. No relationships on record, no significant personal history. One address, the shared apartment with a Stefan Voss Beta, childhood acquaintance from St. Augustine's. Darius turned the last page. A single line, buried in a social services follow-up note from when Butch was 14. Mother deceased, cause recorded. Next of kin notified, minor ward of state. No further action required. He read it again. Then he closed the file and sat with the quiet for a long time. Sarah had spent years trying to put herself back together after what had been done to her. She had left her son in the only place she thought was safe, and eventually the weight of it had become too much to carry. Butch had grown up knowing this, had grown up with the knowledge that the world had broken the one person who should have kept him. And he had taken that knowledge and built himself into something unbreakable anyway. Darius sat back in his chair and looked at the city through his window. No, he thought, with a certainty that had nothing to do with logic. Nobody will ever make him carry that kind of weight again. Not while Darius was breathing. Another meeting. Butch arrived first, going through case notes at the conference table when Darius entered alone. No Kelvin, no escort, just a dark suit cut perfectly to his frame. Butch looked up. "Good morning," he said. Darius sat across from him. "Good morning to you too." Butch almost smiled. He didn't. "The Quentin Mercer deposition is scheduled for the 14th. I need your full documentation of the infrastructure contracts, the originals, not the copies his team has been producing. We've already found 2 discrepancies. You'll have them tomorrow morning. Tonight would be better." Something moved in Darius's eyes. Amusement, dark and warm. "Tonight," he said, "I was going to suggest dinner." Silence. Butch set his pen down with the careful precision of a man buying himself 1 second. "This is a professional engagement. Yes, you're my client. Also, yes. Then dinner is inappropriate." Darius leaned back in his chair and looked at him with unhurried patience that was somehow more unsettling than urgency would have been. "I have been called many things in this city, counselor. Inappropriate has never been among them." He paused. "I find that I want to have dinner with you. I'm telling you that directly, because I don't play games with things that matter to me." Butch held his gaze and felt something he hadn't felt in a very long time and didn't have a name for. A warmth, low and stubborn, pressing up through the careful architecture of his composure. He picked his pen back up. "The documents," he said. "Tonight." Darius smiled, just slightly, just enough. He didn't push. He simply watched Butch for the rest of the meeting with that same dark, steady attention. And when they stood to leave, his hand brushed Butch's at the table's edge, barely a touch, almost accidental, and neither of them acknowledged it. Butch felt it for the rest of the evening. Stefan was pretending to read. Butch could tell because he'd been on the same page for 40 minutes and his eyes weren't moving. He was waiting. Stefan had perfected the art of waiting for Butch. They have been friends for 20 years. He knew any pressure would shut Butch down. So he let the silence sit there, steady and deliberate, waiting for Butch to be the one to break it. Butch lasted until the second cup of tea. "He asked me to dinner," he said without looking up from his own files. Stefan's page finally turned. "Who?" Butch said nothing. Stefan turned another page. "Set the book down. Don't." "I am not doing anything. You're making a face." "I'm not. I can't make a face. You're not even looking at me." Stefan leaned forward. "Darius Alexis asked you to dinner." "It was nothing. I shut it down." "Did you want to?" That was the thing about Stefan. He asked the questions that had no safe answers and then just sat there in the wreckage of them, unbothered, waiting. "He's my client," Butch said. "That's not what I asked." Butch finally looked up. Stefan's expression was not triumphant. It was something gentler than that, careful, the way he had always been careful with this particular subject. Butch's heart. The thing Butch kept behind 3 locked doors and a reputation for being difficult. "He looked me up," Butch said quietly. "I could tell. He knew things during the meeting, small things, the way he chose his words. He knows something about my background." Stefan said nothing. "Nobody does that unless they want something," Butch said. "Or unless they care," Stefan said simply. Butch looked at him for a long moment. Then he stood, gathered his files, and went to bed. But he lay awake for a long time in the dark, and the warmth he couldn't name sat with him in the quiet, and refused to leave. Darius sent the documents that night. He also sent dinner. Not a grand gesture. Nothing that could be easily rejected. A bag, left with the building's front desk, containing 2 containers from the Eritrean restaurant, 2 blocks from Butch's apartment. The address was in your file. The note read, "No signature." Butch stared at the containers for a full minute. Then he ate because the food was extraordinary and he was hungry, and then he was furious about how much he had enjoyed it. And he went to sleep feeling off balance in a way that had nothing to do with the case. The third meeting happened at Darius's building. Kelvin let Butch in and led him not to the conference suite, but to Darius's private office, all dark wood and floor-to-ceiling glass. The city sprawling 40 floors below in the early evening light. Darius was at his desk when Butch entered. He stood immediately, and the fact that he stood, that this man who made other men feel small by remaining seated, stood up when Butch walked in, hit somewhere Butch wasn't prepared for. "The deposition prep," Butch said. "Sit wherever you're comfortable." They worked for 2 hours. Darius was sharp, sharper than most clients, asking questions that cut to the marrow of the case, understanding the legal architecture intuitively. Butch found himself talking to him the way he talked to Stefan, directly, without the careful translation he usually performed for clients. Darius listened like he was collecting every word. "The water treatment facility," Darius said. "Contract 7C. You'll notice it's the one Quentin buried deepest." Butch found it in the stack, reviewed it. 3 shell companies between the original sale and the syndicate. Yes. Why that one specifically? Darius was quiet for a moment. "The Eastern District." "You know it?" "I grew up there." "So did my father." He looked at the document without expression. "Before the company." "Before any of this, he built his first workshop on Crane Street, 2 blocks from that facility. The neighborhood raised him. He paused. Quinton sold the water supply of the people who made my family's name, for a number, 'cause it was convenient. He looked up. I could have settled this privately, recovered the money, moved on. But you didn't. I want it on public record, Darius said. Every number, every name, every shell company. I want the people on Crane Street to know what was done and who stopped it. Butch looked at him across the documents. Then we'll put it on record, Butch said. Darius held his gaze for a moment, and he picked up his pen. At some point the city outside went dark and the lights came on and someone, Kelvin, silent as always, left a tray of food and coffee without being asked. Butch looked up from his notes and realized it had been 3 hours. I need to leave, he said. Can you stay a bit longer? Darius asked. Butch gave him a look. Do you usually say that? Darius glanced up. Say what? Ask people to stay longer than they planned. Only when it's necessary. The room was very quiet. Darius put his pen down and looked across the desk at Butch. The composure was gone, replaced by something plain, steady, and unguarded in a way that made it hard for Butch to look away. I know this is your case, and I am your client, and you have rules that you follow. I respect that. I will follow whatever pace you set. He paused. I just want you to know that I'm not confused about what this is, and I'm not going anywhere. Butch's heart was doing something complicated. I have an early morning, he said. I know. Darius stood and walked him to the elevator himself, past Kelvin's desk, down the private corridor, pressed the button, and waited. When the doors opened, he held them and looked at Butch with that steady, devastating patience. Good night, counselor. Butch stepped in. Good night. The doors closed. He stood in the elevator with a hand pressed to his chest and forced himself to breathe. His pulse hammered against his ribs. Every beat weighted with something he wasn't ready to name. The first date was Darius's idea and Butch's reluctant surrender. A walk, Darius had said on the phone at 11 at night. Just a walk. The park on Meridian has lights along the south path. I'll meet you at the east gate. That sounds like a date. It is a date. Butch had been quiet for a moment. Then, 9 o'clock, fine. Darius was there at 8:45. Butch arrived at exactly 9 and found Darius leaning against the gate with his hands in his coat pockets looking like something that had been carved specifically to make people stop walking. He had left his suit at home, dark trousers, a black coat, and something almost relaxed in the set of his shoulders that Butch had never seen in a professional context. He looked up when Butch approached. City lights traced the angles of Darius's face. And there it was again, that look Darius seemed to save only for him, open and unguarded enough to steal Butch's breath without warning. You're late, Darius said. I'm exactly on time. I've been here 15 minutes. That's a you problem. Darius almost smiled. He fell into step beside Butch without ceremony, and they walked the south path under the lights, amber and gold strung through the old trees, the city a low hum beyond the park's walls. It was a warm night, and the path was mostly empty, and for a long time neither of them said anything, and the silence was not uncomfortable. It was the most comfortable Butch had been in years. Tell me something I don't know about you, Darius said eventually. You have read my file. Your file told me facts. I want to know the real you. Butch considered this. I read manhwa. I don't know what that is. Korean graphic novels. There's a library on Colton Street that carries imports. I've been going since I was 19. He glanced sideways. Stefan introduced me. He's obsessed. Which ones? Currently? Solo leveling. Before that, omniscient reader. Butch looked at him. What about you? What about me? Something I don't know. Darius was quiet for a moment. I can't sleep without a window open. Even in winter, my mother finds it infuriating. The word mother landed softly, and Butch filed it without comment. You're close with her. She's the only person in my life who has ever told me no without consequences." He said it with something that was plainly admiration. "She is also the only person I have ever genuinely feared disappointing." Butch thought about a woman he had never known, a file note with 4 words in it. He set it down before it could catch. "She sounds formidable," he said. "You have no idea," Darius said, and glanced at him with an expression that Butch couldn't fully read in the amber light. "You'll like each other." Butch looked ahead at the path. "You're assuming a lot." "I'm not assuming anything," Darius said simply, and didn't push it further. They walked for 2 hours. The library on Colton Street was small and overstuffed and smelled of old paper and something faintly floral that Butch had never been able to identify. He had been coming here since Stefan dragged him in on a rainy afternoon in their first year of university, and it had become the one place in the city where he fully exhaled. He had not expected to bring Darius here. Darius had simply, one afternoon, said, "Show me," and Butch had looked at him for a long moment and then said, "Fine," and brought him. Darius walked through the narrow aisles with the careful attention he brought to everything, reading spines, occasionally pulling a volume and examining it, asking precise questions. He did not perform interest. He was simply, genuinely curious, and Butch found that he was narrating his own taste to this man with a naturalness that was mildly alarming. "This one," Butch said, pulling Omniscient Reader from the shelf. "The main character survives because he's the only person who's read the story. He knows the plot. He uses it. A man who uses information as power." Darius looked at him. "You identified with that." "I identified with knowing more than the room expects you to." Darius took the volume from his hands, their fingers brushing, and examined the cover. Then he looked up with that look, the steady, warm one, and said, "Show me where to start." They sat in the corner alcove for 3 hours. Darius read the first 2 volumes without speaking. The comfortable weight of being beside someone. When they left, Darius bought both volumes. Butch noticed and said nothing, but felt something expand quietly in his chest. There were other evenings. A Tuesday where they walked the river path and argued companionably about case strategy until Darius steered them into a small restaurant with no signage where the owner knew him by name and fed them both until they couldn't move. A Thursday at Butch's apartment where Stefan, with absolutely zero subtlety, produced a home-cooked meal for 3 and then immediately developed an urgent appointment elsewhere, leaving Darius sitting at their small kitchen table with a tea he hadn't asked for, looking around the apartment with an expression of such genuine interest that Butch found himself telling stories about the place. This crack in the wall from the time Stefan tried to assemble flat-pack furniture, this windowsill where Butch grew herbs for no reason he could fully articulate. Darius listened to all of it. He always listened to all of it. "You've made a real home here," he said at one point, looking around. No condescension, just an honest observation. "It's just an apartment. It's a home. Those are different things." He looked at Butch. "I have a building. You have a home." Butch looked at his cracked wall and his windowsill herbs and didn't say anything. But something in the observation settled into him like a stone finding the bottom of still water. Darius mentioned the dinner 3 times before Butch agreed. The first time, "My mother wants to meet you." Butch had said he'd think about it. The second time, "She's asked again." Butch had said he was busy. The third time, Darius had simply looked at him in the particular way he had, patient, knowing, entirely unbothered by resistance, and said, "Saturday? I'll pick you up at 6. Butch had said, "I can drive myself." Darius had said, "I know." He picked him up at 6. The Alexis estate sat in the northern hills above the city, not ostentatious in the way that new money was ostentatious, but with the settled, undemonstrative grandeur of a family that had been powerful for long enough that it no longer needed to announce itself. Old stone, old trees, a drive that curved through grounds lit warmly in the early evening. The kind of place that said, "We have been here, and we will continue to be here," without raising its voice. Butch sat in the passenger seat and felt nothing he would admit to. "You're quiet," Darius observed. "I'm always quiet." "You're a different kind of quiet." Butch looked out the window. "I've never done this before. Visited someone's family? Any of it." He said it simply, factually. "Stefan's family is a file at St. Augustine's." I haven't had occasion to." He stopped. Darius was quiet for a moment. Then he reached over and put his hand over Butch's on the center console. Said nothing. Just held it for the remainder of the drive. Miriam Alexis met them at the door. She was smaller than Butch expected. He had constructed an idea of her from Darius's descriptions, and the idea had been imposing. The reality was a woman of 60 who stood with the spine of someone who had never needed height to command a room, dark-eyed and sharp-featured. Her silver-threaded hair pinned back, wearing a deep burgundy dress with the ease of a woman who dressed for herself. She looked at Butch. Butch looked at her. Then she stepped forward, took his face in both hands, just briefly, just enough to look at him properly, and said, in a voice that brooked absolutely no argument, "There you are," as if she had been expecting him, as if he had simply been delayed. Then she released him and turned to Darius and said something in rapid Greek that made Darius's expression do the private thing. Then she took Butch's arm and led him inside. Darius Alexis, Darius's father, was everything the estate suggested. A broad-shouldered man with Darius's eyes and a white beard that he wore with the authority of someone who had earned it. He rose from his chair when they entered the sitting room and shook Butch's hand with the gravity of a formal introduction. "My son speaks highly of you," he said. "He's precise about everything," Butch replied. "I've noticed." Elias looked at him. Then he looked at Darius. Then he sat back down and picked up his drink with the expression of a man who had just received confirmation of something he had already decided. "Sit down," he said, gesturing to the chair beside him. "Tell me about the Mercer case." Dinner was 4 hours long. Darius's younger brother, Marcus, arrived 20 minutes late with a leather jacket thrown over a dress shirt and the energy of someone who found punctuality conceptually interesting rather than practically relevant. He was 30, 3 inches shorter than Darius, and had the same dark features arranged in a configuration that was more immediately approachable. Quick to smile, quick to laugh, filling whatever room he entered with a kind of restless warmth. He dropped into the chair across from Butch and looked at him with open, uncomplicated curiosity. "So, you're the one who's broken him." "Marcus," Darius said. "I say that with full admiration. I have been trying to get this man to act like a human being for 30 years. Marcus gestured between them. "Whatever you're doing." "It's working!" He laughed at dinner 2 weeks ago. "Actual laughing," my mother cried. "I did not cry," Miriam said serenely from the other end of the table. "You dabbed your eye." "I had something in my eye." Butch looked at Darius. Darius was looking at the ceiling with the specific expression of a man asking the universe for patience. Butch looked back at Marcus and found that he was, without having planned it, smiling. After dinner, Miriam found him on the terrace. She stood beside him, looking at the city lights below, and was quiet for a moment, in the way of someone who had earned the right to say what they meant without preamble. "He told me a little about your background," she said, "not to disclose, to explain why he wanted me to know." She paused. "What happened to your mother was not your story to carry. I want you to know that I understand the difference." Butch looked at the lights. "She would have wanted this for you," Miriam said simply. "Whatever she was, however broken the world made her, she put you somewhere safe. She wanted you to survive. You did more than that." Butch was quiet for a long time. "He's lucky," Miriam said, shifting tones with the smoothness of a woman who understood when a point had landed and didn't need to press it, "that you're exacting and difficult and refuse to be impressed by him. Every Alexis Alpha needs someone who won't be impressed by them. I have spent 40 years not being impressed by Elias, and it has made him an extraordinary man." Butch glanced at her. She looked back with dark, warm eyes and the faintest edge of a smile. "Welcome," she said. "You belong here, whether you've decided to accept that yet or not." In the car on the way home, Darius glanced at him. "Well," he said. Butch looked out at the dark road, thought about Miriam's hands on his face. "There you are." Thought about Elias treating him like an equal from the first handshake, Arcus's laugh and the 4-hour dinner, and the strange, aching fullness of having sat at a table where he was wanted. "Your brother," he said, "is a menace." "He is," Darius agreed. "I like him." In the darkness of the car, Darius smiled. Really smiled, the private one, the unguarded one, the one that still occasionally hit Butch like a physical thing. He reached over and found Butch's hand. Butch let him hold it the whole way home. It was raining the night it happened. They had been in a late session, a crisis in the case, a motion from Quentin's legal team that needed an immediate response. 3 hours of intense back and forth that had left them both wrung out and sharp-edged. Kelvin had long gone home. The building was empty. Butch was packing his bag when Darius said his name. Not counselor. Not Mr. Butch. Just his name. Quiet, direct, the way Darius said everything that actually mattered. Butch looked up. Darius was standing close, closer than the professional distance they had maintained across weeks of careful navigation. And the look on his face was the one Butch had been both dreading and cataloging since that first afternoon. The one that made no effort to hide what it was. "I need to say something," Darius said, "and I need you to let me finish before you shut it down." Butch held very still. "I have never in my life," Darius stopped. Started again with the precision of a man unused to not having the right words. "I have built everything in my life on knowing exactly what I want and taking it without apology. And then you walked into my conference room, and I have spent 6 weeks having absolutely no idea what to do with you, which is a new experience, and I find that I am inexplicably grateful for it." He paused. "I want to kiss you. I'm asking your permission." The rain hit the glass. Butch had spent his entire life being careful, being armored, building the walls higher each time something tried to get through. He knew every reason to say no. He could list them in order of importance. He looked at Darius, this man who had sent him dinner without asking for anything in return, who stood up when he walked into a room, who had read his file and looked at him afterward with something that was not pity and not hunger, but something far more frightening than either. "Yes," Butch said. Darius crossed the distance between them slowly, giving him every chance to change his mind, taking nothing that wasn't offered. And when he kissed him, it wasn't what Butch had expected. He had expected dominance. Alpha style. The consuming, overpowering thing. Instead, it was soft. Devastatingly, terrifyingly soft. Like something precious being handled with the full awareness of its worth. Butch's bag slid off his shoulder. His hand came up without his permission and gripped the lapel of Darius's jacket. Not pushing, not pulling, just holding on. And Darius made a low sound against his mouth and kissed him deeper. One hand cradling the back of his skull like something that needed protecting. And Butch thought distantly, almost academically, "Oh, this is what it is. This is what it was always supposed to be." When they finally broke apart, the rain was still going, and Butch's heart was completely wrecked, and Darius's forehead was pressed to his, both of them just breathing. "Am I really your first?" Butch asked, his voice rough. Darius pulled back just enough to look at him. Something in his expression cracked open, something raw and honest and almost wondering. "You're my first everything," he said quietly, "in any way that counts." Butch looked at him. For the first time in his life, he believed it. the city watched Darius Alexis and understood nothing. He was still Darius. Still, the man who made other alphas sit down without raising his voice. Still, the one who demolished Quentin's legal team in every preliminary hearing with the kind of calm, surgical precision that left the courtroom feeling like a crime scene. Still iron, still ice. But Kelvin noticed. The way Darius's phone was never face down anymore. The way he checked it at odd hours with an expression that had no business on that face. Something open. Something almost young. The way he told the kitchen to start stocking a specific brand of green tea that he had never drunk in his life. The way he sometimes stopped mid-sentence in a meeting because something had apparently just occurred to him, and excused himself, and came back 2 minutes later with the expression of a man who had just handled something important. "You're smiling," Kelvin said one morning, setting down the morning briefings. Darius looked up. "I smile, not like that." Then Darius looked back down at his papers and said very quietly, "He called me last night. We talked until 3 in the morning. Kelvin did not smile. He was a professional. "Will that be all?" "Yes." And Kelvin answered, "I won't say anything, sir." "I know. Thank you." At home, Butch was doing his own version of losing his mind. He did it quietly, the way he did everything, sitting on the fire escape at midnight with a beer going warm in his hand, turning things over. He had kissed Darius Alexis. He had let Darius Alexis kiss him. He had stood in an empty office building while it rained and held on to a man's jacket lapel like an anchor and felt, for the first time in 30 years of carefully managed solitude, not alone. Stefan appeared at the window. He climbed out and sat beside him without a word. He took the warm beer, sipped it, handed it back. After a while, good alone or bad alone, Butch looked at the city below. "I don't know what I'm doing." "Yes, you do, Stefan. You know exactly what you're doing. You're just scared because it's the first real thing that's ever happened to you and you don't have a protocol for it." Stefan turned to look at him. "He's not your mother's story, Butch. He's not a cautionary tale. He's just a man who is apparently utterly defeated by you, which, for what it's worth, I find deeply satisfying." Butch was quiet for a moment. "He's my first," he said, very low. Stefan understood immediately. "I know." Weeks later, Butch and Darius went on a romantic getaway. The place had no name on any map Butch could find. It was 4 hours south of the city, a private stretch of coast that belonged, he gathered, to no one but Darius in the quiet, unregistered way that Darius owned things. The house sat at the edge of the beach, whitewashed and low, with wide glass doors that opened directly onto the sand. The sky here was a different quality of blue, deeper, wider, the kind of sky that made the city feel like a rumor. Butch stood at the edge of the water in the early morning and felt something happen to his shoulders. A slow release, like a knot unwinding. A knot he hadn't even known was there, until it wasn't. They stood together for a while, the water coming in slow and the sky doing that early morning thing where the light was still deciding what color to be. "Thank you," Butch said. He didn't say it often. He meant it completely. Darius glanced at him. Then he reached out and tucked a strand of Butch's wind-blown hair back from his face, simple, unhurried, and said nothing. They spent the day outside. It was undignified in the best possible way. Butch, who had a reputation for moving through the world with predatory composure, ran into the water ahead of Darius and came up laughing, real laughing, caught off guard by the cold, and Darius, who had an empire and a reputation that made grown alphas sit down, stood at the water's edge looking at him with an expression he made no attempt to manage. Smitten was perhaps the word. Though Darius would have burned the dictionary before using it about himself. They ate lunch on the sand, something Darius had prepared, which had surprised Butch and continued to surprise him. That this man could cook and afterward lay in the sun in the comfortable silence they had built across months of evenings and walks and library corners. Butch read. Darius had Marcus's annotated copy of Solo Leveling and was deep in it with the focused attention he brought to everything. At one point, without looking up, Darius said, "He's going to lose someone he can't recover from." "Keep reading," Butch said. "I can tell by the..." "Keep reading." Darius kept reading. 20 minutes later, he closed the volume and was quiet for a moment. "Ah," he said. "Just that." Butch looked over at him, at the expression on his face, something moved and trying not to show it, and felt the warmth in his chest bloom so wide it was almost painful. "I love you," he thought with a clarity that was new and entire and terrifying. Butch went inside to shower. The bathroom was open and white, the shower a wide glass box with a view of the fading sky. And he stood under the water for a long time, letting the sea and the sun wash off him, and thinking about nothing in particular, about this day, about the man outside, about what it meant that he was here and had not once wanted to be anywhere else. He stepped out, toweled his hair, wrapped the towel at his waist, pushed the door open, and walked back into the room. Darius was standing at the window. He turned at the sound of the door, and then he stopped. Butch stood in the doorway, hair dripping, the light behind him golden, water tracking lines down the cut of his chest and the hard flat of his stomach, the towel sitting low at his hips. He was looking at Darius with the directness he brought to everything, unbothered, unhurried. Darius looked at him. Every careful, constructed, deliberately maintained thing in him simply left. 34 years of iron composure walked out of the building without a word of warning. He felt his pheromones release. He had no choice in it. It was not a decision. It was every alpha instinct he had ever kept on a leash choosing this specific moment to pull free, and the scent that filled the room was not the controlled, managed signal he was accustomed to producing, but something raw and total, dominance and want and mine all at once, a thing that had no interest in being reasonable. Butch's face changed. The directness stayed. But something else came into it. A sudden, new heat. A widening of those dark eyes. The faintest parting of his lips. His hand came up against the doorframe. Then his knees buckled. Darius crossed the room in 2 strides and caught him mid-fall. One arm sweeping beneath him, Butch's weight nothing, lifting him from the floor as if he weighed no more than the evening light, and Butch's pheromones answered in the same instant. Something Butch had been suppressing and managing and keeping on the shortest of leashes suddenly unleashing into the room, and it hit Darius like a wave hitting a wall. Their scents braided in the air. Something ancient and chemical and absolutely mutual. Butch looked up at him from his arms, and the expression on his face was not the composed, armored thing. It was undone, genuinely, completely undone, and not fighting it. He looked like a man who had been carrying his own armor for 30 years and had just, in one overwhelming moment, been too tired to hold it up. "What is this?" Butch said. Not quite a question. "You know what this is," Darius said. His voice was not steady. "I know what it is." Butch's hand came up slowly and touched Darius's face, palm flat against his jaw, learning the shape of him, and though Darius went still with the surprise of it, he did not pull away, could not have pulled away if he had wanted to. "I've been trying not to know for months." Darius carried him to the bed. He laid him down with a care that was at odds with the heat in the room, deliberate, reverent, the way he had always handled this particular thing. His hands found Butch's face and tilted it up, and their eyes met, and he let Butch see all of it. No composure, no construction, just Darius. Entirely, without reservation. Butch reached up and touched the black waves of his hair, thick and soft between his fingers. He hadn't let himself imagine this. He filed the reality of it, the warmth, the texture, the way Darius's eyes closed for a single second at the touch. "God," Butch said quietly. An exhale. an inventory. Everything about you, Butch. Kiss me, Butch said. He bent down and kissed him. Not gently this time, not the careful first kiss in the rainy office, but with the full, honest weight of everything he had been keeping measured and restrained across 6 months of careful navigation. Butch made a sound against his mouth that Darius felt in his spine and kissed him back with equal force. Equal want, the armor completely gone, just Butch, fierce and warm, and his, finally, undeniably his. Touch me, Butch said again, against his lips. Desperate. Raw. His voice had never sounded like that before. He had never let it. I've got you, Darius breathed. His blood was a flat-out run. His hands moved. Butch arched into him and moaned, and Darius felt something he had never felt with anyone else. Not just desire, but the specific, consuming devotion of a man who understood that this was not a conquest. This was a gift being offered freely by someone who had never offered it to anyone. He was going to spend the rest of his life being worthy of it. He pressed his lips to the curve of Butch's throat, and Butch tilted his head back with a breathless trust that broke Darius open completely, and he bared his teeth. The bite was an act of love. Permanent, sure. The seal on something that had been true long before either of them said it. Butch gasped, not in pain, but in the overwhelming, flooding recognition of it, the bond snapping into place like something that had always been there, finally being named. His hand gripped Darius's shoulder. His eyes, when they found Darius's face, were bright and wrecked and completely, finally open. Darius, he said. His name. Just his name. In that voice. Darius pressed his forehead to Butch's, both of them breathing, both of them undone. I love you, Darius said. His voice was barely sound. I have been so in love with you. Butch looked at him in the gold evening light, this man he had dismissed as an arrogant alpha, this man who had sent him dinner without asking for anything back, who had stood up when he walked into rooms, who had sat on a bathroom floor and said hi to a test result, and felt the truth of his whole life click into its final and correct shape. I love you, he said back. The first time he had ever said it to anyone. He meant it with everything he had. It began 3 days after the bite. Butch woke at 4 a.m. with a heat behind his sternum and a disorientation that had nothing to do with sleep. He lay still for a moment, cataloging the sensation with the systematic attention he brought to everything. And then it moved south, and his whole body clenched with it, and he understood. Oh no, he said to the ceiling, with feeling. Beside him, Darius was already awake. He had felt the bond shift, some deep, instinctive awareness that something had changed in the person beside him, and was watching Butch in the dark with an attention that was entirely alert. Butch. Come here, Darius said, quietly, steadily. I am not. Come here. Not a command. An anchor. Something solid to hold on to in a room that was starting to feel too warm. Butch turned toward him. Darius gathered him in, one hand at the back of his skull, the other at his spine, Butch's face pressed into the curve of his throat, directly against the scent gland, and the relief was immediate and physical and maddening because it worked. Darius's scent like a cool hand on a fever, and Butch hated how much he needed it, and also could not make himself pull away. I've got you, Darius said into his hair, low and calm and certain. I've got you. You're safe. Butch held on to him. Darius stayed awake the entire night. He spoke to him in low, even tones, sometimes nothing in particular, sometimes about the case, sometimes about the view outside the window, just the sound of his voice, grounding and present. He kept his hands on Butch at all times, not demanding anything, simply there. Warmth and weight and steadiness in a night that felt like it was pulling the floor out. By morning, the worst had passed. Butch lay exhausted against his chest, and was quiet for a long time. "This is embarrassing," he said finally. "No," Darius said at once. He gathered him close, his gaze softening as affection flooded through him. The morning Butch found out, Stefan was making coffee in the kitchen. Butch came out of the bathroom holding the test with the expression of a man who has received information he needs to file before he can respond to it. He stood in the hallway for a moment. Stefan looked up. He took one look at Butch's face and turned the coffee off. "Come sit down," he said. Butch sat. He put the test on the table. Stefan looked at it, and then looked at Butch with an expression of such complete, unguarded emotion that Butch had to look away briefly. "Butch," Stefan said. I know, Stefan." Stefan sat down beside him. He put his hand over Butch's on the table. "Are you okay?" Stefan asked. "I don't know yet. Honest. Simple. I'm going to tell him today." The legal case was building toward a verdict. Butch had constructed an airtight argument. Quentin's lawyers were brilliant and expensive and running out of road, which meant Quentin was running out of time. Desperation made dangerous men reckless. Butch began noticing things, small things. A car parked outside his building 2 mornings in a row, a pause on a phone line, a sense that he was being watched. He mentioned it to Darius. Darius's expression did not change. His eyes did. "From now on," Darius said with a quiet that was not calm, "Kelvin drives you, Butch." The way he said it, not a command, a request with fear underneath it. Butch took his hand. "Okay," he said. What neither of them knew yet was that it was already too late to stop what was coming. What they had was the time before, weeks of it. Darius learning to make tea correctly. Butch reading briefs with his feet in Darius's lap. Saturday mornings. A kind of happiness that was very quiet and very complete. And then the morning Butch looked down at a test result, and his entire world reorganized itself around a single fact. He sat on the bathroom floor for a long time. Then he called for Darius. Darius came through the door already reading the expression on his face and stopped when he saw what Butch was holding. Silence. Then Darius sat down on the bathroom floor beside him. After a long moment, Butch looked at him. Darius's face was completely open. Everything he felt was visible on the surface. And what was on the surface was joy. Enormous, terrified, consuming joy. "Hi," Darius said softly. Butch laughed. "Hi," Butch replied. Darius turned and kissed his temple. "I've got you," he said, "both of you. Nothing gets to you." Butch believed him. He should have held on to that moment tighter. Quentin believed Darius Alexis had taken everything from him. The syndicate deal had been his exit strategy. He hadn't expected Darius to find the paper trail. He especially hadn't expected the lawyer. 18 months of careful obfuscation unraveled in 6 weeks. The verdict date was set. Quentin looked at the photograph. Darius Alexis's mate. Darius Alexis's apparently pregnant mate. Then he picked up his phone. "I need a team," he said. "Professional. I need them ready in 2 weeks." He set the phone down. Darius Alexis had taken everything from him. It was only fair to return the favor. Quentin moved on a Wednesday. Butch was 3 steps from Kelvin's car. 3 steps. The sedative was fast, professional. Butch fought. He took 2 of them down before the sedative hit. His last conscious thought was Darius. "Find me." Kelvin called Darius while the car was still burning. Darius listened. Then he turned around. His eyes were black. "Find out where Quentin's holding him," he said. "Every property, every shell company, every name." He picked up his jacket. "And get out of my way." Butch woke on a cot in a concrete room. He took inventory. 1 high window, a metal door, a single bulb overhead. He put his hand on his stomach. Alive. The bond hummed faintly in his chest. Darius. Distant, but present. Good, Butch thought. He pressed his hand to his stomach again. We're okay. He's coming. Quentin came in the morning. I want Darius to drop the case. He won't. He will if the alternative is. He won't, Butch said. You've given him a reason to come through that door that goes beyond the case now, which means you've made your situation significantly worse. Quinta's jaw tightened. You're very calm for someone in your position. I'm very calm for someone in any position. It's a character trait. Butch met his eyes. I'm also pregnant, and I want you to understand something very clearly. If anything happens to this pregnancy, there is no version of the future where you walk away from Darius Alexis. The room was very quiet. Quinton looked at him for a long moment. Then he stood. I'll come back tomorrow. I'll be here, Butch said pleasantly. The door closed. Day 2, Butch thought. Come on, Darius. Marcus was in Darius's office when Stefan arrived. Marcus crossed the room and took the laptop bag from Stefan's shoulder. You don't have to be fine right now. Stefan looked at him. Tell me what to do, he said. I need to be useful. Marcus put his hand on Stefan's shoulder. Come here. We've got 3 unverified property records in the Eastern District. Stefan sat down. Marcus sat beside him. Their shoulders touched. Neither of them moved away. On the 3rd morning, Butch asked for a book. Quinton visited again that afternoon. The terms are simple, Quinton said. Darius drops the case. You go home. And the evidence. Destroyed. I'm not trying to win this from in here, Butch said. I'm waiting for my mate to come through the door. He looked at Quinton steadily, and the longer this takes, the angrier he gets. After they left, Butch stood. He worked the metal bracket loose from the cot frame. He put it in his waistband. Come on, Darius, he thought. I am ready when you are. Stefan found it at 11:17 at night. Marcus, he said. Marcus read the property record and put the tablet in front of Darius. Darius looked at it for exactly 3 seconds. Then he picked up his phone. The 4th call was to his father. I have found him, then go get him. Darius stood at the window for 1 moment and felt the bond. Alive. I am coming, he thought. They hit the warehouse at 2 in the morning. Darius went in first. He followed the bond through smoke and shouting. The door was metal. He put his shoulder through it. Butch was on his feet. He was standing in the center of the room with the metal bracket in his hand. Ready, not afraid. He looked at Darius. The bracket lowered. You took your time, Butch said. Darius crossed the room. He took Butch's face in both hands. Alive. Safe. Present. Hi, Butch said softly. Darius pulled him in. The baby's okay, Butch whispered. We're both okay. Darius made a sound he would never make in any other room in the world. I know, he said. I have got you. They found Quinton on the roof. Stop! Quinton stopped. You sold the water supply of the people who made my family's name. Darius's voice was cold. And then you took my mate. My pregnant mate. Quinton said nothing. The case proceeds. The kidnapping charges proceed alongside it. The syndicate connection is already with the federal prosecutor. Darius looked at him. You have no leverage, no allies, and no remaining options. Quinton's phone trembled in his hand. You can't touch me. I am not going to. Darius turned toward the door. The police will be here in 4 minutes. He didn't look back. I'd recommend coming in from the roof. Darius sat down beside Butch. Butch leaned into him. Done? Butch asked. Done, Darius said. Stefan looked over Butch's head at Marcus. Marcus looked back. Something passed between them. Stefan looked away first, but he was almost smiling. The verdict came down 6 weeks later. Guilty on all counts. Butch watched the gavel fall from the gallery, Stefan on one side of him, Darius's hand wrapped around his on the other. Afterward, on the courthouse steps, a journalist called out, Mr. Alexis, is there anything you'd like to say about the outcome? Darius looked at Butch. The corner of his mouth moved. I have everything I need, he said. Stefan pretended to gag. Butch elbowed him. Darius tucked Butch's hand into the crook of his arm and walked down the steps like a man who had already won everything worth winning. Behind them, the city went on, loud and indifferent as it always had, but the man who had grown up inside its walls with nothing, who had vowed never to be soft and never to need. He leaned into Darius's side in the afternoon sun. He was warm. He was home.